He left her on their wedding night. 10 years later, she shows up with triplets and a legal notice. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The two pink lines appeared on the pregnancy test with startling clarity. Aaliyah Bennett blinked, then blinked again, her heart thundering against her ribs as she sat on the edge of the marble bathtub in Alexander's luxurious Upper East Side apartment. 25 years old, and her life was about to change forever. "We're having a baby," she whispered to her reflection in the gold-framed mirror, a tentative smile forming on her lips. She and Alexander had been living together for 6 months, a whirlwind romance that began when she coordinated a charity gala for his investment firm through Gramercy Events, where she worked as a junior event manager. Alexander Rhodes, 32, CEO of Rhodes Investments, one of Wall Street's most influential brokerage firms. Handsome, powerful, ambitious, and soon to be a father. Aaliyah's smile broadened as she carefully tucked the pregnancy test into her pocket. Tonight would be special. Tonight, their future would truly begin. By 6 o'clock, the apartment was transformed. Aaliyah had left work early, telling her boss she had a doctor's appointment. She'd spent the afternoon preparing Alexander's favorite meal, pan-seared scallops with risotto, and setting the dining table with crystal glasses and the Limoges china they'd bought together in Paris just 2 months ago. Candles flickered across the table, casting a warm glow over the bottle of sparkling water chilling in an ice bucket. At 7:35, she heard his key in the lock. Taking a deep breath, Aaliyah smoothed her dress and touched the small velvet box in her pocket that now held the positive pregnancy test. "Alex," she called out, moving toward the entryway. "Welcome home." Alexander barely looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Just finishing an email," he muttered, his designer shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. "The Osaka acquisition is becoming a nightmare." "I made your favorite," Aaliyah said, gesturing toward the dining room. "And I have something important to tell you." Alexander finally glanced up, noticing the candlelit table. He frowned slightly. "What's the occasion? Did I forget something?" "No," Aaliyah laughed nervously. I have news. Good news." Dinner began with Alexander still distracted, checking his phone between bites and commenting occasionally about market fluctuations in Asia. Aaliyah barely touched her food, rehearsing her announcement in her head. As Alexander finished his risotto, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Alex, I found out something today that's going to change our lives." He raised an eyebrow, finally giving her his full attention. "I'm pregnant," Aaliyah said, her voice full of wonder. She pulled out the small velvet box and opened it, revealing the pregnancy test. "We're going to have a baby." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Alexander's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief, then to something that made Aaliyah's stomach clench: annoyance. "You're joking, right?" He pushed back from the table. "A baby? Now?" I thought you'd be happy," Aaliyah stammered, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. Alexander ran his fingers through his impeccably cut hair. "Happy? What kind of naivety are you living with? I'm in the middle of the biggest acquisition of my career, and you spring this on me?" "But we've talked about having a family someday," Aaliyah said, her voice small. "Someday. Not now." Alexander stood up, pacing the dining room. "I don't have time for a family, Aaliyah. My focus is my company." He checked his Patek Philippe watch, adjusting it on his wrist, a nervous habit she'd noticed whenever he was agitated. "Let's be practical about this. There are discreet clinics that can handle this situation." The words hit Aaliyah like physical blows. "Handle this situation? You mean, you want me to get an abortion?" "It's the sensible solution," Alexander said, his voice cooling to the professional tone he used in board meetings. "We're not ready for this. I'm not ready for this." "I'm not getting rid of our baby," Aaliyah said, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Then I don't know what to tell you." Alexander picked up his phone. "I need to finish preparing for tomorrow's meeting. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." The days that followed were a living hell. Alexander barely spoke to her, leaving for work before she woke and returning late, often sleeping in his home office. Aaliyah continued going to work at Gramercy events, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy while her world crumbled around her. She called his office repeatedly, but his assistant informed her that Mr. Rhodes was in meetings and couldn't be disturbed. 1 week after her announcement, Aaliyah returned from work to find the apartment building's head of security waiting in the lobby. "Ms. Bennett," he said uncomfortably, "Mr. Rhodes has requested that I escort you to collect your belongings." "What?" Aaliyah stared at him in disbelief. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your luggage is already packed and waiting in the entryway. Mr. Rhodes has instructed that you vacate the premises immediately." Upstairs, she found 3 suitcases neatly arranged in the hallway, everything she owned packed away as if she were nothing more than a house guest who had overstayed her welcome. On top of the largest suitcase sat an envelope. With trembling fingers, Aaliyah opened it to find $5,000 in cash and a typed note. "This should cover your expenses for the next few months. Do not attempt to contact me. My lawyers are instructed to handle any communication. A.R." "Where is he?" she asked the security guard, her voice breaking. "I need to speak with him." "Mr. Rhodes left for a business trip this morning, ma'am. He won't be returning until you've vacated the apartment." Aaliyah tried calling Alexander's cell phone repeatedly as she was escorted from the building, but discovered he had blocked her number. In desperation, she took a taxi to the Gramercy events office, hoping her boss might help her find temporary housing. "I'm sorry, Aaliyah," the receptionist said, not meeting her eyes. "Ms. Turner asked me to inform you that your services are no longer required." "I'm fired? Why?" The receptionist merely shrugged, sliding an envelope across the counter. "Your final paycheck. Security will escort you out." Later that night, in a cheap hotel room paid for with Alexander's money, Aaliyah discovered through a colleague that Gramercy Events was partially financed by the Rhodes Investment Group. Alexander hadn't just thrown her out of his home, he'd ensured she lost her job and references as well. With no employment, no home, and a baby on the way, Aaliyah spent the next week in a daze, searching for affordable housing and applying for jobs. Her savings were minimal. Living with Alexander, she'd gotten used to his paying for everything, and without references from Gramercy, finding work in event planning proved impossible. Finally, she found a tiny room for rent in the Bronx, $800 monthly for a space barely large enough for a bed and dresser. She took 3 jobs: receptionist at a dental office in the mornings, waitress at a diner in the afternoons, and telemarketing on weekends. Even with all 3, she barely made enough to cover rent and visits to a community clinic for prenatal care. In her 5th month, during a routine ultrasound, the technician frowned at the screen, then smiled. "Ms. Bennett, are you aware you're carrying multiples?" "What?" Aaliyah stared at the screen in disbelief. "Triplets. You're having 3 babies." Aaliyah left the clinic in a daze, tears streaming down her face. 3 babies. How could she possibly manage 3 babies alone, working 3 minimum-wage jobs? As she waited for the bus back to the Bronx, a financial magazine on a newsstand caught her eye. Alexander's face stared back at her from the cover. "The King of Wall Street: How Alexander Rhodes Revolutionized the Financial Market at 33. The subtitle mentioned his recent engagement to the heiress of a traditional banking family. 3 months after throwing Aaliyah out, he was already engaged to someone else. That night, sitting on the floor of her miserable room, surrounded by secondhand baby books and budget spreadsheets, Aaliyah made a decision. "You won't need him," she whispered to her growing belly, her hand gently caressing the place where 3 little lives grew. "I'm going to build an empire so large that one day he'll have to look up to see us." The next day, Aaliyah sold the only valuable item she still possessed, a Rolex watch Alexander had given her on their 3-month anniversary, and used the money to enroll in a night course on computer programming. While working her day jobs, she spent evenings learning coding, discovering she had a natural aptitude for algorithms and financial systems. 2 weeks before her due date, Aaliyah landed a remote position as a junior developer at a financial technology startup that allowed her to work from home. The salary was modest, but it was more than her 3 previous jobs combined, and it offered the flexibility she desperately needed. When Maya, Olivia, and Lucas were born, premature but healthy, Aaliyah brought them home to her tiny apartment, now equipped with a computer and a fierce determination. While the babies slept, she worked tirelessly, learning every aspect of financial software development and laying the groundwork for what would eventually become her own system. One day, she promised her sleeping children, their tiny fingers curled around her thumbs, the man who discarded us like trash will discover that he threw away not just a family, but an entire empire. As Aaliyah drifted off to exhausted sleep on her thin mattress on the floor, she couldn't possibly imagine that 15 years later, she would be in control of a billion-dollar company, watching Alexander Rhodes beg for a meeting with her. The nurse's face shifted from professional detachment to concern as she studied the ultrasound monitor. Aaliyah lay on the examination table, her heart accelerating as she watched the technician's frown deepen. "Is something wrong with my baby?" Aaliyah asked, her voice small in the dimly lit room of the community clinic. The nurse adjusted the wand on Aaliyah's slightly rounded belly, pressing it more firmly against her skin. "Ms. Bennett, I'm going to ask the doctor to come in and confirm what I'm seeing." 5 excruciating minutes later, Dr. Garcia entered, her white coat wrinkled from a long shift. She took the wand from the nurse, moving it methodically across Aaliyah's abdomen while studying the grainy black and white image. "Ms. Bennett," Dr. Garcia said finally, turning the screen slightly, "do you see these 3 distinct shapes here?" She pointed to 3 small bean-like forms. "I'm seeing 3 separate heartbeats. You're carrying triplets." "Triplets?" Aaliyah whispered, the word barely audible. "3 babies?" The doctor nodded. "Identical triplets from the look of it. Quite rare, actually." Aaliyah stared at the ceiling, tears welling in her eyes. 1 baby had seemed impossible enough. 3 felt like the universe's cruelest joke. In the clinic's bathroom, Aaliyah gripped the edge of the sink, her breathing shallow and quick. 3 babies. How will I feed 3 babies? Where will they sleep? Her tiny room in the Bronx barely had space for her second-hand crib, let alone 3 infants. Her mind raced through calculations, triple the diapers, triple the formula, triple the doctor visits, while her meager savings dwindled by the day. Outside the clinic, rain fell in sheets, matching the tears streaming down her face. As she waited for the bus, a magazine stand caught her eye. Time seemed to slow as she registered Alexander's face staring back at her from the glossy cover of Financial Weekly. "The King of Wall Street: How Alexander Rhodes Revolutionized the Financial Market at 33. The subtitle made her stomach lurch. "Rhodes announces engagement to Catherine Winthrop, heir to the Winthrop banking fortune." Aaliyah purchased the magazine with her last $5, reading it under the bus shelter. The article praised Alexander's bachelor lifestyle and mentioned how Catherine would bring stability to the financial wunderkind's personal life. There was no mention of a pregnant ex-girlfriend, no hint of the 3 lives he had rejected. That night, in her bleak room with water stains on the ceiling and a mattress on the floor, Aaliyah spread the contents of her wallet before her. $27.43. Her next paycheck from the diner wouldn't arrive for a week, and rent was due in 10 days. "We'll figure this out," she whispered to her growing belly. "I won't let you down like he did." Her eyes fell on the Rolex watch Alexander had given her, the only valuable possession she'd kept. "A successful woman needs to know the value of time," he'd said when presenting it to her. The irony wasn't lost on her now. The next morning she entered a pawn shop in Midtown, the watch heavy in her pocket. "This is authentic," she told the appraiser. "It retails for $15,000. The man behind the counter, with thinning hair and suspicious eyes, examined it under a loupe. "3,000. Take it or leave it." "It's worth 5 times that," Aaliyah protested. "To someone who can verify its provenance, maybe. To me, it's $3,000. Cash." Walking out with $3,000 felt both like defeat and opportunity. That afternoon, Aaliyah enrolled in a night programming course at a community college in Brooklyn. The advisor had mentioned that tech jobs offered flexibility and decent pay, 2 things she desperately needed. "You're our only pregnant student," her instructor noted during the first class. The room was filled predominantly with men, most avoiding eye contact with her obviously pregnant form. "And the only woman. Tech needs more diversity." For 6 weeks, Aaliyah maintained her punishing schedule: dental receptionist from 8 to 2, waitressing from 3 to 9, then programming classes until 11. Weekends were filled with telemarketing shifts and homework. Each night, she fell into exhausted sleep, only to wake with renewed determination. "Your code is surprisingly intuitive," her instructor commented one evening, reviewing her assignment. "You have a natural talent for algorithms." The rain was relentless that October, seeping through the cracks in her apartment window. Aaliyah placed buckets strategically around her room, the steady drip, drip, drip a constant soundtrack to her studying. One particularly violent storm sent water cascading down her walls, shorting out her laptop, her lifeline to both employment and education. The next day, Aaliyah collapsed at the diner, her body finally rebelling against the relentless pace and stress. She awoke in the hospital, monitors beeping steadily. "You're experiencing preterm labor symptoms," Dr. Eleanor Winters explained, her kind face lined with concern. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you're severely anemic. You need complete bed rest or you'll lose these babies." "I can't rest," Aaliyah said, tears streaming down her face. "If I don't work, we'll be homeless." Dr. Winters sat on the edge of the bed. "You're killing yourself, Aaliyah, and potentially your children. There must be someone who can help. Family? The baby's father?" Aaliyah's bitter laugh surprised even herself. "My parents died years ago, and the father—" She gestured to the window, toward the financial district skyline. "He's probably in his penthouse right now planning his society wedding." Something in Dr. Winters' expression shifted. "I see. Well, sometimes we have to create our own family." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card. "My son runs a tech startup. He's always complaining about needing good coders who understand financial systems. With your background in event planning for financial firms and your new coding skills." 2 days later, Aaliyah interviewed virtually from her hospital bed, her hospital gown replaced with a borrowed blouse, her laptop positioned to hide her pregnant belly. "Your code samples show promise," said Jason Winters, Dr. Eleanor's son. "And Mother mentioned you worked at Gramercy Events, handling Rhodes Investments accounts?" Aaliyah nodded, pushing aside the pang at Alexander's company name. "I coordinated their major client events for 2 years." "Perfect. We're developing trading algorithms for smaller investment firms. Someone who understands both the technical and client sides would be invaluable. The position is remote. We're all distributed anyway. Can you start next week?" The salary was modest by tech standards but felt like a fortune to Aaliyah, enough to afford a clean 1-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood with working heat and no leaks. Dr. Winters helped her move, bringing essentials for the babies: a proper crib, changing table, and rocking chair. "Consider it a loan," Eleanor insisted when Aaliyah protested. "Pay me back by taking care of yourself and these little ones." The remaining weeks of pregnancy passed in relative stability. Aaliyah worked from home, developing code for financial trading platforms while learning everything she could about market algorithms. At night, she read parenting books for multiples, preparing for the overwhelming task ahead. At 32 weeks, her water broke. 16 hours of labor later, Maya, Olivia, and Lucas entered the world, tiny but fierce, each weighing just over 3 pounds. They spent 4 weeks in the NICU, growing stronger as Aaliyah divided her time between hospital visits and remote work. "You're extraordinary," the NICU nurse commented one evening, watching Aaliyah code one-handed while holding Lucas. "Most parents of triplets can barely function, and you're building software." Aaliyah smiled tiredly. "When there's no choice, you find a way." The day she brought the triplets home was both terrifying and triumphant. Her apartment, though small, was clean and organized, with 3 bassinets lined against one wall and her desk against another. Eleanor visited daily, helping with feedings and allowing Aaliyah precious hours of uninterrupted work. During late-night feedings, Aaliyah would whisper to her babies about algorithms and market trends, using them as sounding boards for her ideas. "The traditional models are too exclusionary," she told Maya as she nursed. "What if we created a system that democratized market access instead?" As the babies slept, Aaliyah worked feverishly, developing a side project, her own algorithmic trading model designed to open financial markets to everyday people. Between diaper changes and feedings, she built the foundation of what would eventually become her revolutionary system. "One day," she promised her sleeping infants, "we'll build something so remarkable that he'll realize what he threw away." While configuring her computer in the new apartment, Aaliyah couldn't possibly imagine that this first job in the financial industry would be the foundation of the revolutionary algorithm that, in a decade, would bring Rhodes Investments to its knees. The contractions began at 4 in the morning, sharp and insistent. Aaliyah had been working late, finalizing code for a trading module when the first pain hit, making her double over her keyboard. At 32 weeks, she knew it was too early. "Not yet," she whispered to her swollen belly, stroking it gently. "Just a little longer, please." But the triplets had other plans. By the time she called Dr. Winters, her water had broken, soaking through her sweatpants and puddling on the floor of her apartment. "Don't move," Eleanor instructed over the phone. "I'm sending an ambulance. These babies are coming today." The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Aaliyah lay on the gurney, alone and terrified, clutching her hospital bag in one hand and her phone in the other, her only connections to the outside world. "Where's your partner?" a nurse asked, adjusting an IV in Aaliyah's arm. "There isn't one," she replied, another contraction stealing her breath. The pain was unlike anything she'd imagined, white-hot and all-consuming. "Triple the babies, triple the contractions," Dr. Winters explained hours later, checking Aaliyah's dilation. "You're progressing faster than expected. We might not have time for an epidural." 16 excruciating hours after that first contraction, Maya arrived. 4 pounds, 2 ounces of fierce determination, her tiny cry piercing the delivery room. Olivia followed 7 minutes later, slightly smaller at 3 pounds, 15 ounces. Lucas completed the trio 12 minutes after his sisters, the smallest at 3 pounds, 8 ounces. Aaliyah caught only glimpses of her children before they were whisked away to the NICU, 3 impossibly small bundles trailing wires and surrounded by medical staff. "They need help breathing," a neonatologist explained, "but their vitals are strong considering their gestational age. You've given them a fighting chance." Alone in the recovery room, Aaliyah stared at the ceiling, her body empty and aching. Instead of the joy she'd expected to feel, there was only fear and overwhelming responsibility. 3 tiny lives depended entirely on her, and she couldn't even be with them. When she was finally wheeled to the NICU 4 hours later, the reality of her situation hit with full force. Her babies lay in separate incubators, dwarfed by machines and monitors, their translucent skin revealing blue veins beneath. "Can I touch them?" she asked the nurse hesitantly. "Of course. Open these portholes here. They need to know you're here." Aaliyah reached her hand into Maya's incubator first, gently placing her finger against her daughter's palm. The tiny fingers reflexively curled around it, and something fierce and protective surged through Aaliyah's chest. "I'm here," she whispered. "Mommy's here, and I'm not going anywhere." By the 3rd day, still recovering from delivery and desperate not to fall behind on work, Aaliyah brought her laptop to the NICU. She sat up beside the incubators, coding between kangaroo care sessions and feeding times. "You're the first mother I've seen debugging software while pumping breast milk," remarked a night nurse with raised eyebrows. "No choice," Aaliyah replied, not looking up from her screen. "These medical bills won't pay themselves." The NICU became her office for the next 4 weeks. The nurses grew accustomed to her presence, the determined young mother who split her time between skin-to-skin contact with her babies and intense concentration on her computer. She attended virtual meetings while holding Lucas against her chest, muting herself during his fussy moments and unmuting to present financial modeling algorithms. "This code you've written for transaction optimization," her team lead commented during one call. "It's unlike anything we've implemented before. How did you conceptualize it?" Aaliyah glanced down at Maya, whose tiny hand was wrapped around her finger as she slept. "I've been thinking about systems that work for everyone, not just those with privileges and connections. What if financial access wasn't determined by who you know or where you started?" During feeding times, Aaliyah would speak softly to her babies, explaining complex financial concepts as if they were bedtime stories. "The market creates artificial barriers," she told Olivia as she carefully fed her through a tube. "But algorithms don't care about your background or connections. They only care about patterns and opportunities. That's how we'll beat him one day." Late one night, as Aaliyah dozed in the recliner beside the incubators, her laptop still open on her lap, she was startled awake by a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You need proper sleep," Eleanor said, taking in Aaliyah's exhausted face and the code still glowing on her screen. "Can't," Aaliyah mumbled. "Deadline tomorrow, and they might need me." Eleanor closed the laptop firmly. "You're no good to them if you collapse. The nurses will call if anything changes." When Aaliyah hesitated, Eleanor added more gently, "You're not alone in this, Aaliyah. Let someone help you just for a few hours." That small kindness, the recognition that she didn't have to carry everything by herself every moment, broke something in Aaliyah. She fell asleep on Eleanor's shoulder, tears streaming silently down her face. The next morning, refreshed from actual sleep, Aaliyah spotted a financial magazine in the NICU waiting area. The glossy cover featured Alexander and his new wife at a charity gala, the caption reading, "Rhodes and Winthrop, banking's new power couple expecting their first child." The smiling photo of Alexander with his hand proudly placed on his wife's barely visible bump made bile rise in Aaliyah's throat. The article described the anticipated arrival of the Rhodes heir with glowing predictions about the child's future in the family business. "Their firstborn," Aaliyah whispered bitterly, glancing toward the NICU where 3 tiny infants, the actual first Rhodes children, fought for every breath. That evening, as she sat between the incubators, Aaliyah spoke to her children with new determination. "He doesn't know what he gave up," she told them, her voice steady and sure. "But one day, everyone will know who you are, the real Rhodes heirs." After 4 long weeks, Maya was the first cleared for discharge, followed by Olivia 2 days later. Lucas, the smallest, needed another week before joining his sisters. Bringing them home one by one felt both triumphant and terrifying. Aaliyah had transformed her apartment in their absence. The small living room now contained a triple bassinet, changing station, and her desk with dual monitors. The bedroom held 3 cribs arranged against the wall, leaving just enough space for her own bed. "It's not much," she told Maya as she carried her through the door for the first time, "but it's ours." By the time Lucas came home, completing their family unit, Aaliyah had perfected a system. Feeding schedules were posted on the refrigerator, color-coded for each baby. Her work hours were arranged around their naps and medical appointments. Every minute was accounted for, optimized like the algorithms she created. At night, when the babies finally slept after their last feeding, Aaliyah would work on her side project, an investment platform that could democratize market access. She coded while simultaneously watching the rise and fall of 3 tiny chests, sometimes reaching out just to feel their breath against her hand. reassuring herself they were real. "See this line of code?" she whispered to Lucas one night as he fought sleep in her arms. "This is how we'll change everything. People like us, without connections, without privilege, will have the same opportunities as people like him." On Lucas's 1-month birthday, Aaliyah received the digital edition of Financial Times with a feature spread on Alexander Rhodes, the new generation Rhodes, banking scion welcomes son. The accompanying photo showed Alexander beaming proudly in a hospital suite that looked more like a luxury hotel, holding a newborn wrapped in what appeared to be a cashmere blanket. Rage and determination coursed through Aaliyah as she looked from the magazine to her own 3 babies, finally sleeping peacefully in their second-hand cribs. In a moment of pure fury, she tore the digital magazine page from her screen, the satisfying ripping sound startling Olivia awake. As she soothed her daughter back to sleep, Aaliyah made a quiet promise. "You are the true heirs, and one day, everyone will know it." That night, fueled by a potent mixture of exhaustion, determination, and righteous anger, Aaliyah completed the first prototype of her algorithmic trading system, a system designed to level the playing field, to give access to those the traditional market excluded. "I may not have his connections," she told her sleeping infants, taking a rare moment to simply watch them breathe, "but I have something more powerful, the knowledge of what it means to be shut out. And I'm building the key that will open those doors for everyone." When she finally fell asleep between her children that dawn, her laptop still glowing with lines of revolutionary code, Aaliyah couldn't have known that this algorithm, born between bottle feedings and diaper changes, would become the seed of the financial system that would make Bennett Financial a global powerhouse and reduce Alexander Rhodes to a mere spectator of her success. 5 years melted away in a blur of coding sessions, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Aaliyah stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror at 5 in the morning, noting the faint lines forming around her eyes, badges of honor earned through relentless determination. Behind her, the small apartment was already humming with the day's preparations as she meticulously packed 3 distinct lunchboxes. "Maya, blue container has your extra math worksheets," she called out, labeling the purple lunchbox with a star sticker. "Olivia, I added sheet music in your red one. Lucas, the Spanish vocabulary cards are in your green box." "Thanks, Mommy." 3 voices chorused from the living room where they sat in perfect formation, each 5-year-old absorbed in their morning activities. Aaliyah balanced her tablet on the counter, reviewing code while spreading 3 different sandwiches. No crusts for Maya, extra tomato for Lucas, plain for Olivia. Each lunch was engineered to their preferences, each morning orchestrated with military precision. The alarm on her phone buzzed, signaling it was time to move to the next task in her carefully calibrated day. The community daycare center was a 15-minute walk from their apartment. Ms. Rodriguez greeted them at the door, her warm smile a constant in their daily routine. "Good morning, Bennett Squadron," she said, high-fiving each child as they entered. "Aaliyah, you look exhausted. Late night coding again?" "The financial models won't debug themselves," Aaliyah replied, handing over 3 color-coded folders. "Maya's working on multiplication now. I've included some exercises. Olivia's piano teacher sent new scales, and Lucas finished his Spanish workbook, so I've added intermediate vocabulary." Ms. Rodriguez accepted the folders with a mixture of amusement and concern. "They're 5, Aaliyah. Extraordinary, yes, but still 5. They're capable of so much more than standard curriculum offers," Aaliyah said, the defensive edge in her voice softening as she watched her children already settling into their activities. "I just want to give them every opportunity." "The opportunities you didn't have?" Ms. Rodriguez asked gently. Aaliyah's phone chimed with an incoming message before she could respond. Her eyes widened as she read it. "Everything okay?" Ms. Rodriguez asked. "Better than okay," Aaliyah breathed. "FinTech Solutions just sold to Meridian Capital. All employees get 0.5% of the sale. My share is $175,000. The number hung in the air between them, a sum that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago when Aaliyah was counting pennies for formula. That afternoon, Aaliyah sat across from Eleanor Winters in a small cafe near the hospital, spreadsheets and business plans scattered between their coffee cups. "It's enough seed money," Aaliyah said, her fingers tapping rapidly on her laptop. "With this capital and your investment, we can launch Bennett Algorithm Solutions. I've been developing this platform for years between projects. It's ready." Eleanor studied the business plan. "And what exactly does Bennett Algorithm Solutions do?" "It democratizes financial access," Aaliyah said, her eyes bright with passion. "Traditional markets favor those with connections, education, and capital. My algorithm eliminates those barriers, analyzing patterns and opportunities that conventional systems miss. It will give people like me, like I was, the same chances as people born into privilege." "People like Alexander Rhodes," Eleanor said quietly. Aaliyah's expression hardened momentarily before she nodded. "Yes, exactly like him." 2 weeks later, Aaliyah stood in a tiny office space in Brooklyn, the paint peeling from the walls and a single desk occupying the center of the room. She carefully hung a freshly printed sign on the door. "Bennett Algorithm Solutions." "What do you think?" she asked the triplets, who were examining the space with critical 5-year-old eyes. "It's small," Maya observed, always practical. "But it has big windows," Olivia added, touching the glass. "It's the beginning," Lucas declared with the certainty only a child could possess. "Like in my books, every empire starts somewhere small." Aaliyah felt her throat tighten as she looked at her 3 children, all showing distinct personalities and talents, yet united in their unshakable faith in her vision. "Yes, it's just the beginning." The beginning proved harder than anticipated. Aaliyah soon discovered that potential investors were far more interested in her algorithm than in her leadership. The pattern became depressingly familiar: initial excitement over her technology, followed by subtle suggestions that perhaps she should consider bringing on someone with market experience. "Your background is impressive for someone self-taught," a venture capitalist told her after reviewing her pitch. "But investors might feel more comfortable with a seasoned financial professional at the helm, perhaps a co-founder with Wall Street credentials." "You mean a man," Aaliyah said flatly. The investor's uncomfortable chuckle confirmed her assessment. "Studies show that diverse leadership teams perform better. A male co-founder might balance the company profile." Aaliyah gathered her presentation materials, her voice steady despite the fury bubbling beneath her calm exterior. "My algorithm already accounts for balance, sir. Unfortunately, your investment philosophy doesn't." Nights became increasingly challenging as Aaliyah balanced motherhood with her fledgling business. The triplets would build elaborate blanket forts beside her desk, falling asleep to the sound of her keyboard while she worked through financial models and code refinements. One particularly late night, as Aaliyah hunched over her computer trying to debug a stubborn section of code, she felt a small hand on her arm. Maya stood beside her, eyes serious behind her tiny glasses. "Mommy, you added wrong," she said, pointing to the grocery receipt Aaliyah had been tallying earlier. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "They charged us $3 too much. The broccoli was on sale, but they put in the regular price. The math is wrong." Aaliyah stared at her 5-year-old daughter, then carefully checked the receipt. Maya was right, to the penny. As the weeks passed, Aaliyah observed with astonishment as each of her children revealed extraordinary abilities. Olivia could reproduce complex piano pieces after hearing them just once, her small fingers moving with uncanny precision across the keys of the electronic keyboard Eleanor had given her. Lucas constructed elaborate narratives in both English and Spanish, using vocabulary that left his teachers speechless. "Mommy, may I elucidate my hypothesis about dinosaur extinction?" he asked one evening, completely serious. These moments of wonder were interspersed with the grinding reality of building a business from nothing. Aaliyah created an elaborate schedule on the wall of their apartment. color-coded blocks representing work hours, school time, quality time with each child, meal preparation, and the precious few hours allocated for sleep. Every minute was accounted for, optimized like her algorithms. After months of rejection from traditional investors, Aaliyah finally found her first client, a small credit union willing to test her algorithm on a portion of their investment portfolio. "We don't have much to lose," the credit union manager admitted candidly. "Our returns have been subpar for years. Your system can't do worse than our current approach." 3 months later, the credit union called an emergency meeting with Aaliyah. "There must be some mistake," the manager said, sliding a performance report across the table. "These returns can't be accurate." Aaliyah's heart sank. "I can assure you the system is functioning as designed. If there are issues—" "Issues?" The manager laughed. "Your algorithm increased our returns by 27% in the first quarter. That's not an issue. That's a miracle." That evening, Aaliyah received her first significant check as a company. She arrived home, the envelope clutched in her hand, to find the triplets engrossed in their individual pursuits. Maya solving advanced mathematics problems, Olivia composing a simple melody, Lucas writing in his journal. "Kids," she announced, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to celebrate." Minutes later, they were dancing around the small living room, giggling as Aaliyah twirled them one by one. They ordered pizza, a rare treat, and Aaliyah poured grape juice into plastic cups for a special toast. "To Bennett Algorithm Solutions," she said, raising her cup, "and to our future empire." "To our empire," the children echoed, clinking their cups together with such solemnity that Aaliyah had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. Later that night, after tucking the triplets into bed, Aaliyah carefully filed away the contract in a folder labeled "Beginning." She ran her fingers over the embossed Bennett Algorithm Solutions logo, allowing herself a moment of pride. While filing away the first signed contract in a folder marked "Beginning," Aaliyah couldn't imagine that in just 7 years she would be rejecting a $750 million acquisition offer from Rhodes Investments itself, an offer made by a desperate Alexander trying to save his declining company. 3 years transformed the Bennett Algorithm Solutions from a one-woman operation in a shabby Brooklyn office into Bennett Financial Technologies, a rising star in the financial sector with 50 employees and sleek headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. Aaliyah checked her appearance in the bathroom mirror before her Bloomberg interview, adjusting the lapel of her designer suit, a far cry from the second-hand clothes she'd worn during her first business meetings. "Ms. Bennett, we're ready for you," called the production assistant, clipboard in hand. "The segment begins in 3 minutes." Aaliyah nodded, following her through the labyrinth of the studio. This interview would reach millions, positioning Bennett Financial as a disruptive force in the market. As she settled into the chair opposite the interviewer, she thought of the countless nights spent coding while the triplets slept, the years of rejection from investors who couldn't see past her gender or single motherhood. Now, at 33, she was finally being recognized not as an anomaly, but as a visionary. We're speaking today with Aaliyah Bennett, founder and CEO of Bennett Financial Technologies. The interviewer began once the cameras rolled. "Ms. Bennett, your algorithm is being called revolutionary. What inspired your approach?" Aaliyah leaned forward slightly, her posture reflecting the confidence she'd worked so hard to build. "Our algorithm was designed for people the financial system traditionally excludes. When you've been on the outside looking in, you notice the barriers others take for granted. We're not just offering a new investment tool. We're rewriting who gets access to financial opportunities." Back at Bennett Financial's headquarters, Aaliyah strode confidently into the boardroom where investors who had once rejected her now sat eager to hear quarterly results. The irony wasn't lost on her as she distributed reports showing performance that exceeded projections by 17%. "As you can see," she explained, pointing to a graph with a steadily climbing line, "our client base has expanded beyond credit unions to include 3 regional banks and 7 institutional investors. Revenue has tripled since last quarter. One investor who had once suggested she find a more experienced male co-founder now leaned forward eagerly. "These numbers are extraordinary, Aaliyah. What's your target for the next quarter?" She savored the moment briefly before outlining the aggressive growth strategy she'd developed. The meeting concluded with handshakes and backslaps, the same men who had questioned her competence now competing for her attention. Down the hall from the boardroom, a colorful space buzzed with activity. The children's room, designed specifically for the triplets who now spent afternoons at the office after their gifted program let out. Through the glass wall, Aaliyah could see Maya, 8 years old and serious as ever, studying financial charts spread across a small table. "Mom, I've been looking at your algorithm's response to market volatility," Maya said when Aaliyah entered, pushing her small glasses up her nose. "I think if you added this variable here, you could improve efficiency by 6%. Aaliyah studied her daughter's notes, written in precise handwriting far beyond her years. "That's actually brilliant, Maya. How did you calculate this?" Maya shrugged, as if her insight were obvious. "The patterns are clear if you know where to look." At the other end of the room, Olivia sat at a keyboard, her fingers dancing across the keys as she practiced for the upcoming investor event. At 8, she already played with the precision and feeling of someone years older. The melody filled the room, drawing admiring glances from employees passing by. "Olivia will open with Chopin, then transition to her own composition," Aaliyah told her events director. "The investors won't know what hit them." Lucas, meanwhile, was leading an impromptu tour for visiting Japanese investors, switching effortlessly between English and Japanese as he explained the company's mission. His confidence and articulation made it easy to forget he was only 8, standing barely waist-high to the impressed businessmen following him. "Your son speaks excellent Japanese," one investor commented to Aaliyah afterward, "and his explanation of your algorithmic approach was remarkably clear." "The triplets spend a lot of time here," Aaliyah explained. "They absorb everything." That evening, Aaliyah sat across from her lawyer in a glass-walled conference room, pen poised above a contract that would change everything. The venture capital firm had offered $25 million for a 20% stake in Bennett Financial, valuing the company at $100 million. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" her lawyer asked. "You'll maintain controlling interest, but this introduces significant outside influence." Aaliyah signed with a steady hand. "The capital will fast-track our expansion, and I've ensured the terms protect our mission of financial democratization." Later that night, alone in her office, Aaliyah allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction as she scrolled through the Wall Street Journal on her tablet. The headline caught her eye immediately: "Rhodes Investments loses market share to innovative algorithms." The article detailed how traditional investment firms were struggling to compete with nimble, tech-driven companies offering higher returns and lower fees. Alexander's firm had posted its third consecutive quarter of client exodus, primarily to algorithm-based platforms like Bennett Financial. A smile touched Aaliyah's lips as she read. Not vindication, she told herself, just confirmation she was on the right path. Still, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest at the knowledge that Alexander's empire was beginning to crumble while hers ascended. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a momentous occasion. Aaliyah stood in the empty living room of a spacious Chelsea apartment, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The real estate agent waited patiently as she walked through the 3-bedroom space, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the emotion welling up inside her. "I'll take it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the significance of the moment. Her first real home, not a rental, not someone else's space she occupied temporarily, but her own. That afternoon, she picked up the triplets from school with the keys to their new home in her pocket, waiting for the perfect moment to share the news. As they walked through the park, she finally stopped beneath a large oak tree. "I have something to tell you," she said, kneeling to their level. "We're moving to a new home, a bigger one, with a room for each of you." Their reactions were exactly as she'd anticipated. Maya asked practical questions about proximity to their school and Aaliyah's office. Olivia wondered if they could get a real piano. Lucas immediately began planning how he would arrange his books in his very own room. The following week brought another milestone. Aaliyah sat across from Dr. Harrison, headmaster of the Westbrook Academy, one of Manhattan's most prestigious private schools, the same school that had rejected her application for the triplets 3 years earlier when she couldn't afford the tuition. "We're absolutely delighted to welcome your extraordinary children, Ms. Bennett," Dr. Harrison said, his tone markedly warmer than during their previous meeting. "Their test scores are remarkable, and your recent profile in Business Weekly certainly caught our attention." "How interesting," Aaliyah replied, maintaining a pleasant smile despite the bitterness rising in her throat. "Their intelligence hasn't changed since our last meeting. Only my bank account." Dr. Harrison had the grace to look embarrassed. "Our scholarship funds were unfortunately limited at that time. But now, with your generous foundation donation, we can offer opportunities to more deserving students from diverse backgrounds." Aaliyah nodded, satisfied that her success would open doors not just for her children, but for others like them. As Bennett Financial continued its meteoric rise, Aaliyah made a significant change to her office decor. For years, she had kept her personal life separate from her professional identity, fearing the mother label would undermine her authority in the male-dominated financial world. Now, with her success undeniable, she placed a framed photograph of the triplets prominently on her desk, no longer hiding the central motivation for everything she'd built. Her first international business trip proved more challenging emotionally than she'd anticipated. Though Eleanor stayed with the children, Aaliyah found herself video calling 3 times daily, her heart aching at the distance despite the importance of the European partnerships she was securing. When she returned 5 days later, she found her apartment immaculately maintained, homework completed, and 3 excited children waiting with a hand-drawn "Welcome Home" banner. They proudly showed her the projects they'd completed in her absence: Maya's advanced coding exercise, Olivia's new composition, Lucas's essay that had won a school competition. On a rare Saturday morning with no meetings or urgent deadlines, Aaliyah stood in her kitchen in pajamas, flipping pancakes as the triplets set the table. Laughter filled the apartment, the sound of simple joy that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. Later that day, while the children were absorbed in a board game, Aaliyah checked her email and found a financial news alert: roads selling, Hampton's estate, following financial setbacks. The article included photos of the magnificent beachfront property Alexander was liquidating after strategic repositioning of his company's assets. Aaliyah closed her laptop without comment, returning to her children and their game. Her success didn't need to be measured against his failure, though she couldn't entirely suppress the satisfaction of knowing that while he was downsizing, she was building something that would last generations. While signing the documentation for her new corporate office, Aaliyah didn't know that in just 5 years the Bennett Tower would be a landmark in Manhattan's skyline, visible from the window of the apartment where Alexander Rhodes, now divorced and in professional decline, would live alone. Manhattan gleamed below as Aaliyah cut the ceremonial red ribbon stretched across the entrance to what would soon become the Bennett Tower. Camera flashes illuminated her face as she stood on the vacant lot in Midtown that would, within 18 months, host a 60-story testament to her success. "Bennett Financial Technologies is proud to break ground on our future home," she announced to the gathered crowd of investors, journalists, and employees. "This tower will stand as a symbol of financial inclusion and innovation for generations to come." The triplets, now 12 years old, stood proudly beside her, each holding a small ceremonial shovel. Maya's analytical gaze surveyed the construction plans with obvious calculations running behind her eyes. Olivia, ever the performer, smiled gracefully for the cameras. Lucas charmed the reporters with articulate responses beyond his years. Back at their current headquarters, Aaliyah immediately transitioned from the public ceremony to a closed-door security briefing. Bennett Financial's exponential growth had brought unwelcome attention. "They tried to breach our firewall 47 times last month," explained Carlos, her head of cybersecurity, pointing to a map showing attack origins. "These aren't random hackers. They're sophisticated, targeted attempts from competitors desperate to replicate your algorithm." Aaliyah's expression hardened. "Enhance encryption protocols. Double the security team if necessary. Our intellectual property is the foundation of everything we've built." Later that afternoon, her communications director entered her office with a concerned expression, holding the latest issue of the Financial Chronicle. "You might want to see this," she said, placing the magazine on Aaliyah's desk. The headline blared in bold type. "Bennett, billionaire, visionary, and single mother, can a woman really do it all?" The article questioned whether Aaliyah's responsibilities as a mother compromised her effectiveness as a CEO, suggesting that her divided focus might eventually prove detrimental to investors. One anonymous source claimed she regularly missed meetings due to child care issues, a complete fabrication. Aaliyah's jaw tightened as she scanned the text. The writer had dedicated 3 paragraphs to speculating about the father of her children, wondering whether maternal overcompensation drove her ambition. "Schedule an interview with Financial Times," she told her communications director. "It's time to address this directly." 2 days later, Aaliyah sat poised and controlled as cameras rolled for her response. The interviewer opened with the same tired question about work-life balance. "Let me clarify something," Aaliyah replied, her voice steady. "Don't ask me if I can do it all. Ask yourself why you never questioned if men could. When male CEOs have children, do you write articles wondering if fatherhood compromises their leadership? My children aren't distractions from my work. They're the reason I built this company. They remind me daily why financial access matters." The clip went viral, generating millions of views and sparking discussions about double standards in business. Subscriptions to Bennett Financial's platforms surged 15% in the following week. At home that evening, Aaliyah found Maya sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by spreadsheets and a calculator. Her daughter looked up as she entered, her eyes serious behind her glasses. "Mom, I've been analyzing your story about choosing to have us through independent production, as you call it," Maya said, her tone analytical rather than emotional. "Statistically, your explanation has logical inconsistencies." Aaliyah's heart rate quickened. Of course, Maya would be the one to question the narrative. Her brilliance with patterns and probability made the sanitized version of their origin story increasingly implausible. "What inconsistencies?" Aaliyah asked carefully, sitting beside her daughter. "You've said you chose to have children on your own, that it was a deliberate decision," Maya continued. "But your career trajectory shows a significant disruption exactly when we were born. If it was planned, the timing makes no logical sense. You would have waited until after establishing your career." Aaliyah swallowed hard. She'd rehearsed this conversation countless times in her mind, standing before her bathroom mirror, but always stopped at the same point. "Your father." Before she could formulate a response, Maya added, "Plus, there's no record of sperm donor expenses in your financial history from that time." I checked. "You investigated my financial records?" Aaliyah asked, momentarily distracted by this revelation. Maya shrugged. "I was curious about our origin. Data doesn't lie, Mom." That night, after the triplets were asleep, Aaliyah practiced again in front of her mirror. "Your father was someone I believed in, who didn't believe in us." She shook her head. The words felt insufficient, the truth too heavy for 12-year-olds, regardless of their intelligence. Her rehearsal was interrupted by a knock on her bedroom door. Olivia stood in the hallway holding an old newspaper clipping. "I found this while researching famous pianists for my music history project," she said quietly, extending the yellowed paper. "This man has Lucas's eyes." Aaliyah's hands trembled as she took the clipping, a society page from 14 years ago showing Alexander at a charity gala, his distinctive blue-gray eyes striking even in the grainy newsprint. "Many people have blue-gray eyes," Aaliyah deflected, keeping her voice casual. "Genetics is fascinating, isn't it? Certain traits appear across unrelated populations." Olivia studied her mother's face with the perceptiveness that often made Aaliyah feel transparent. "Yes," she finally said. "Fascinating." The following week, Aaliyah presided over a board meeting where international investors applauded Bennett Financial's latest results. The company now employed 300 people across 4 countries, with the algorithm expanding into emerging markets at an unprecedented rate. "Our valuation has reached $1.2 billion after this funding round," Aaliyah announced. "Construction on Bennett Tower begins next month, and our Asian expansion remains ahead of schedule." After the meeting, Aaliyah dined at Le Bernardin with her primary investors. Through the restaurant's elegant glass partitions, she glimpsed a familiar profile, Alexander Rhodes, seated with what appeared to be potential clients. He looked older, tension evident in the set of his shoulders as he spoke with animated urgency. Aaliyah excused herself before dessert, slipping out through a side entrance to avoid an encounter. In the car home, she found herself checking financial news on her tablet. Rhodes Investments had lost 3 major clients in the past quarter, their stock down 17% year-over-year. That evening, Eleanor joined Aaliyah for tea in her Chelsea apartment, the 2 women watching the triplets complete homework at the dining table. "Maya's asking questions," Aaliyah confided quietly. "Olivia found an old photo of him. It's only a matter of time before Lucas connects the dots, too." Eleanor stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Children deserve the truth, especially from the parent who's always been there. One day they'll discover everything. It's better they hear it from you." "I know," Aaliyah sighed. "But when I start to tell them, I remember his face when he said he wanted nothing to do with us. How do I explain that kind of rejection?" Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Aaliyah sat alone in her home office, reviewing reports on Rhodes Investments' financial difficulties. The company was hemorrhaging clients to algorithm-based platforms, primarily Bennett Financial. A recent article detailed how Alexander was seeking emergency capital infusion after a series of misguided bets during the financial crisis. Lost in thought, she didn't hear Lucas enter until he spoke. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, observing her tear-streaked face with concern. Aaliyah quickly closed the browser window. "Just tired, sweetheart. What are you doing up so late?" "I had an idea for my app and wanted to write it down," he explained, sitting beside her. "Why were you crying?" "Sometimes success comes with complicated emotions," she answered carefully. For her birthday the following month, the triplets surprised Aaliyah with a joint project, a meticulously crafted timeline of her achievements beginning with "Mom had the courage to have us on her own," and chronicling every milestone from her first algorithm to the groundbreaking of Bennett Tower. As Aaliyah studied the timeline, pride mingled with guilt at the carefully curated origin story she'd allowed them to believe. The foundation of their understanding was built on an omission that grew more significant with each passing year. That evening, financial news alerts lit up her phone. Rhodes Investments seeks strategic partners after substantial losses. Aaliyah saved the article in a folder on her tablet, a practice she'd maintained for years, tracking Alexander's gradual decline as her own star rose. Watching the steel framework of Bennett Tower rise against the Manhattan skyline, Aaliyah couldn't predict that in 3 years, in that very building, she and Alexander Rhodes would stand face to face for the first time in 15 years, with 3 teenagers between them who didn't know the truth about their own blood. The construction of Bennett Tower progressed steadily against the Manhattan skyline, each new floor a testament to Aaliyah's relentless determination. She often found herself gazing at the rising structure from her office window, wondering if Alexander ever looked up at what she had built, what they could have built together if he hadn't discarded her and their children like inconvenient baggage. Today, on the morning of the triplets' 15th birthday, Aaliyah stood on the helipad atop the partially completed Bennett Tower. The wind whipped her tailored Armani suit as she waited for her company helicopter to land. At 40, she had achieved what most considered impossible, transforming a desperate coding project created between diaper changes into Bennett Financial Technologies, now valued at $4.7 billion. The helicopter descended, blades slicing through the autumn air. As she climbed aboard, Aaliyah's phone buzzed with birthday messages from the triplets, each reflecting their distinct personalities. Maya's message included a mathematical equation that, when solved, spelled, "Thank you for everything." Olivia had sent a recording of her playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Lucas had written an eloquent paragraph that brought tears to her eyes. 15 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday that she sat in that tiny room in the Bronx, pregnant and abandoned, swearing to build something monumental from the ashes of Alexander's rejection. That evening, their penthouse apartment transformed into a celebration space. Maya proudly displayed the certificate for her second registered patent, an algorithmic innovation that had already attracted attention from major tech companies. Olivia, resplendent in a blue gown, had just returned from an audition at Juilliard, where the admissions committee had broken protocol to offer her immediate acceptance. Lucas arrived last, trophy in hand from winning the state debate championship, his eloquence and logical precision reminiscent of someone Aaliyah tried not to think about. "Speech!" Lucas called out, raising his sparkling cider. 15 years of being the best mom in the universe deserves recognition." Aaliyah laughed, emotion catching in her throat. "I should be toasting you three. Everything I've built was because of you, for you." As they dined on their favorite foods, Aaliyah's phone rang. Her assistant Caroline calling despite strict instructions not to disturb this family celebration. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Bennett, but the final confirmations for the Financial Technology Annual Conference just arrived. I thought you'd want to know immediately." "It could have waited until tomorrow, Caroline," Aaliyah sighed, stepping away from the dinner table. "Even the confirmation from Rhodes Investments?" Caroline asked, her tone suggesting she understood the significance. Aaliyah's hand tightened on the phone. "Alexander Rhodes confirmed personally?" "Yes. His assistant mentioned he's eager to explore partnership opportunities after losing the European Central Bank contract. Apparently, Rhodes Investments is in quite desperate straits." After ending the call, Aaliyah returned to the table, her expression carefully neutral despite her racing heart. For 15 years, she had meticulously avoided any direct contact with Alexander, building her empire from a distance while tracking his gradual decline. Now, in less than a week, they would be in the same room. "Everything okay, Mom?" Maya asked, her perceptive eyes missing nothing. "Just conference details," Aaliyah replied smoothly. "The event where I'm receiving the Innovator of the Decade award next week." "We'll be there," Lucas said proudly. "Front row." "Actually, you'll join me on stage," Aaliyah corrected. "Bennett Financial's success is as much your story as mine." Later that night, after the triplets had retired to their rooms, Aaliyah stood in her expansive closet, contemplating what to wear to the conference. Her fingers trailed over designer pieces that now filled her wardrobe, a far cry from the second-hand clothes she once wore to job interviews. She pulled out a crimson Valentino gown, holding it against herself in the mirror. The color of power. Not revenge, she reminded herself. Justice. The following morning, Aaliyah met with Eleanor for breakfast at their favorite cafe. Now the medical director of the Bennett Foundation, Eleanor remained Aaliyah's closest confidant and advisor. "Alexander will be at the conference," Aaliyah said quietly, stirring her coffee. "First time in 15 years we'll be in the same room." Eleanor studied her friend's face. "The triplets will be there too. Have you considered what might happen when all of you are together? The resemblance between Lucas and Alexander is undeniable now." Aaliyah set down her spoon. "Do you think it's time? They're 15, old enough to understand, but..." Old enough to resent not hearing it from you if they discover it another way, Eleanor finished gently. It's time, Aaliyah. They deserve to know before any accidental meeting. That afternoon, Aaliyah reviewed her acceptance speech, carefully crafting references to her journey as a single mother without revealing the complete truth. Each word was meticulously chosen to highlight her triumph without directly acknowledging the man who had thought her disposable. As she worked, Lucas knocked on her office door. "Mom, I'm researching successful financial leaders for my debate prep. I was reading about Alexander Rhodes. His early career trajectory was fascinating, wasn't it? Before the decline, I mean." Aaliyah nearly choked on her coffee. "What made you choose him as a subject?" Lucas shrugged. His algorithm-resistant investment approach was considered revolutionary in the early 2000s. Of course, it proved fatally flawed when confronted with systems like yours. Still, there's something interesting about studying why previously successful models fail. "Yes," Aaliyah managed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Failure is often more instructive than success." After Lucas left, Aaliyah found Maya in the home library, surrounded by financial reports and her own calculations. "I've been analyzing the Rhodes investments decline," Maya said without looking up. "It's fascinating how your algorithm practically predicted their downfall, almost as if you specifically designed it to counter their exact approach." Aaliyah leaned against the doorframe. "All robust systems identify vulnerabilities in competitors." Maya finally looked up, her intelligent eyes searching her mother's face. "True. But the probability of your system so perfectly exploiting their specific weaknesses suggests more than coincidence. It's almost personal." That evening, Aaliyah stood before her bathroom mirror, rehearsing the words she had avoided for 15 years. "There's something I need to tell you about your father. He wasn't a sperm donor. He was—" She paused, seeing Alexander's cold eyes as he'd dismissed her from his life. "He was someone who made a choice not to be your father." The words felt inadequate, clinical, unable to capture the devastation of that night, the humiliation of being escorted from the building with her possessions in trash bags, the terror of facing pregnancy alone and penniless. How could she explain to 3 brilliant, loved teenagers what it felt like to be deemed worthless by the man who helped create them? The night before the conference, Aaliyah finalized her preparations. The Bennett Financial Technologies would dominate the event. Her speech was scheduled as the centerpiece, her award the most prestigious of the evening. Alexander would be relegated to a minor participant, his once mighty Rhodes investments now seeking partnerships from companies that wouldn't have returned his calls a decade ago. Caroline called with the final schedule. "The conference begins at 7 p.m., gala dinner at 9, and your speech is scheduled for 10:15. The triplets will join you directly from school for the dinner." "Perfect," Aaliyah confirmed. "And the seating arrangements?" "You're at the head table, of course. Rhodes is at table 7, prominent enough to acknowledge his historical significance in the industry, but not close enough for conversation." Aaliyah selected her crimson gown from the closet, along with the diamond earrings she'd bought herself after Bennett Financial's first billion-dollar valuation. Tomorrow evening would mark the culmination of 15 years of relentless work. Public recognition that the woman Alexander Rhodes had deemed unworthy had fundamentally transformed the financial landscape. As she prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a message from Maya. "Mom, I've been thinking about your algorithm's origin code, the parts you wrote while we were infants. There's something embedded there, isn't there? A pattern that tells a story you've never shared with us." Aaliyah stared at the message, her throat tightening. Of course Maya would find it, the emotional architecture buried in the code, written during sleepless nights when pain and determination fueled her creativity. The algorithm that had revolutionized finance had begun as both a lifeline and a diary, encoding her journey from abandonment to self-creation. "We'll talk after the conference," she typed back. "There's a story I should have told you long ago." As she zipped up her crimson dress on the evening of the conference, Aaliyah didn't imagine that within hours, the the secret meticulously guarded for 15 years would explode publicly, altering forever not just her life and her children's, but also the fate of the empire Alexander had once prized above all else. The crimson dress clung to Alia's curves like a second skin as her town car pulled up to the Plaza Hotel's grand entrance. She took a steadying breath, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. For 15 years, she had envisioned this moment, walking into a room as an equal, perhaps even a superior, to the man who had once deemed her worthless. Ms. Bennet. What an honor! The event coordinator rushed forward as Alia stepped onto the red carpet. Camera flashes erupted around her, financial journalists clamoring for a comment from the woman the Wall Street Journal had dubbed the algorithm queen. Alia smiled with practiced ease, offering a brief wave before proceeding into the hotel's opulent lobby. The annual Financial Technology Conference had transformed the historic space into a glittering showcase of wealth and power, the very circles that had once been firmly closed to a pregnant, abandoned woman from the Bronx. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over Manhattan's financial elite. Alia moved through the pre-dinner cocktail reception with deliberate grace, accepting congratulations and fielding investment queries with the confidence of someone who belonged. CEOs who wouldn't return her calls 5 years ago now interrupted conversations to greet her. Venture capitalists who had rejected her pitch pressed business cards into her hand, hoping for a second chance. Alia was discussing expansion plans with the Japanese finance minister when she felt it, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the weight of a gaze she hadn't felt in 15 years but somehow recognized instantly. She didn't need to turn to know Alexander Rhodes had entered the room. Maintaining her composure, Alia finished her conversation before allowing herself to scan the crowd. And there he was, standing near the bar, a whiskey in hand. The years had been both kind and cruel to Alexander. His dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, lending him a distinguished air, but new lines etched his face. Not the distinguished creases of laughter, but the sharp furrows of stress and setbacks. His bespoke suit still screamed wealth, but his posture told a different story. The subtle tension of a man fighting to maintain his position. For a moment, their eyes didn't meet, allowing Alia to observe him unnoticed. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, Alexander turned. Their gazes locked across the crowded room. Alia watched the progression of emotions across his face: confusion, recognition, and finally, disbelief. She excused herself from her conversation partners and moved deliberately across the room, not toward Alexander but to the champagne table, forcing him to come to her if he wanted to speak. From the corner of her eye, she saw him drain his whiskey and make his approach. "Alia?" His voice was barely audible, a stunned whisper. She turned with the unhurried confidence of someone greeting a distant acquaintance. "Alexander." Her tone was neutral, professional, as if he were any other industry colleague rather than the man who had left her pregnant and destitute. You're the founder of Bennett Financial?" Disbelief colored his words as his eyes darted to her name badge, then back to her face, as if reconciling the woman before him with the one he had discarded. "Evidently." She offered a cold smile. "You always were talented at disconnecting." Alexander flinched at her deliberate choice of words, an echo of his dismissal 15 years ago. "I never made the connection between Bennett Financial and the woman you threw out with $5,000 and instructions never to contact you again?" Alia finished for him, her voice low but steady. "I'm not surprised. People we discard rarely remain in our thoughts, do they?" Before Alexander could respond, the event coordinator's voice came over the speakers, announcing dinner. Alia excused herself with practiced ease, leaving Alexander staring after her as she glided toward the head table where her place card awaited. From her vantage point, she could see him being directed to a table much further back in the room, a seating arrangement that hadn't happened by accident. The first course had just been served when the ballroom doors opened again. Alia's heart swelled as Maya, Olivia, and Lucas entered, each dressed impeccably for the occasion. Maya wore a tailored navy pantsuit that mirrored her mother's business attire, her analytical gaze already scanning the room. Olivia's elegant black dress complemented her artistic sensibilities, while Lucas stood tall in a charcoal suit that highlighted his broadening shoulders and increasingly familiar jawline. A murmur rippled through the assembled financial elite as the triplets made their way to the head table. Though they occasionally appeared in financial publications as Bennett's prodigies, their presence at this particular event, and their striking appearance, drew attention from every corner of the room. Aaliyah rose to greet them, embracing each in turn. "You all look amazing," she whispered, genuine pride warming her voice. "Sorry we're late," Lucas said, kissing her cheek. Olivia's recital ran longer than expected. Standing ovation, of course. As Lucas spoke, Aaliyah became acutely aware of Alexander's gaze. From his table he had frozen mid-conversation, fork suspended in air as he stared at Lucas. Even from a distance, Aaliyah could see the shock of recognition wash over his face, the unmistakable blue-gray eyes, the characteristic set of the jaw, the Rhodes posture that genetics had faithfully reproduced. "Mom, the CEO of Singularity wants to discuss a partnership for my app," Lucas continued, completely unaware of the man watching him as if seeing a ghost. "Is it okay if I meet with him after dinner?" "Of course," Aaliyah replied, forcing her attention back to her son. "Just remember, no equity discussions without legal present." Throughout dinner, Aaliyah could feel Alexander's eyes repeatedly returning to their table, studying each of the triplets with growing comprehension. Maya and Olivia bore less obvious Rhodes traits than Lucas, but the family resemblance became unmistakable when seen together. 3 variations on a theme that included their mother's warmth and their father's striking features. As dessert was being served, the master of ceremonies approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our honoree of the evening, the visionary who transformed financial access and technology." Aaliyah squeezed each of her children's hands before rising to approach the stage. The spotlight followed her path, her crimson dress catching the light like liquid fire. Standing at the podium, she surveyed the room of financial power brokers, many of whom had dismissed her ideas years ago. 15 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear, "many told me there was no place for me in the financial world, that I wasn't enough, that my ideas were unrealistic." Her eyes found Alexander's for just a moment. "Today, I stand before you not merely to prove they were wrong, but to ensure that no one else hears those words again." Her speech wove together technical innovation with her vision of financial democratization, never explicitly mentioning her personal journey, but allowing its triumph to infuse every word. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 2 minutes. As Aaliyah made her way back through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding impromptu investment inquiries, she sensed Alexander maneuvering to intercept her path. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice tighter than before, "could we speak? In private?" She met his gaze directly, unflinching. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss in private that couldn't be said here." His eyes darted to the triplets, who were engaged in conversation with investors several yards away. They're my children, aren't they?" he whispered, his voice a mixture of realization and disbelief. "Biologically speaking, you contributed DNA," Aaliyah replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "But being a father requires far more than a genetic sample, Alexander." Before he could respond, Lucas approached, his easy confidence a stark contrast to Alexander's obvious discomfort. "Mom, the Singularity CEO is ready to talk whenever you are," he said, then noticed Alexander. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't interrupt anything important," Aaliyah assured him. "Lucas, this is Alexander Rhodes of Rhodes Investments. Alexander, my son Lucas." Lucas extended his hand politely, completely unaware of the emotional tempest raging in the man before him. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. I've read about your innovative approach in the early 2000s. Of course, that was before the collapse of 2018. Alexander took Lucas's outstretched hand as if in a trance, visibly shaken at receiving his own expressions, his own mannerisms, reflected back at him from a young man who had grown up without knowing him. "Mr. Rhodes was just congratulating me on the award," Aaliyah interjected smoothly. "Actually, we have some history. I worked for him in a way before founding Bennett Financial." "Really? You never mentioned that," Lucas remarked, curiosity piqued. "Some experiences are so insignificant they're hardly worth remembering," Aaliyah replied with a practiced smile. "If you'll excuse us, we need to greet some investors." As they walked away, Alexander remained rooted in place, watching the family that could have been his, now wealthier, more powerful, and completely beyond his reach. While they moved through the crowd, Aaliyah didn't notice a financial journalist who had been standing close enough to overhear their exchange, his recorder capturing every word of the tense interaction between the two financial titans and the boy who connected them. The financial journalist hurried from the Plaza Hotel, his recorder clutched tightly in his hand like a winning lottery ticket. By midnight, the audio file had been transcribed, verified, and shaped into the explosive exclusive that would dominate headlines within hours. Aaliyah's phone began ringing at 5:30 in the morning. She reached for it groggily, the peaceful aftermath of her triumph shattered by her publicist's panicked voice. "Have you seen the Financial Times?" Jane asked without preamble. "Or Wall Street Journal? Or literally any financial news site?" Aaliyah sat up, instantly alert. "Number, what's happened? Check your email. Now." With trembling fingers, Aaliyah opened her inbox to find dozens of urgent messages. She clicked on Jane's forwarded article, and the headline made her blood freeze. "Bennett Financial CEO reveals past with Rhodes. He fired me when I was pregnant with his triplets." The article detailed the tense confrontation at the conference, quoting Aaliyah's exchange with Alexander verbatim, including her confirmation that the triplets were biologically his. The writer had connected dots that had remained separate for 15 years, unearthing records of Aaliyah's employment at Gramercy events, the timeline of her sudden dismissal, and the coincidental launch of Rhodes's engagement to Catherine Winthrop just months later. "This wasn't how they were supposed to find out," Aaliyah whispered, horror washing over her as she realized the triplets would see the news before she could tell them herself. She leapt from bed, hastily throwing on clothes as she called each of their rooms. No answer. Racing downstairs, she found the penthouse empty, a note on the kitchen counter in Maya's precise handwriting. "Gone to school early. Debate team emergency meeting. MO&L. "They don't know yet," she breathed, grabbing her phone to call their driver. "Bring them home immediately. Tell them it's a family emergency." By 8 o'clock, Aaliyah's home office had transformed into crisis management headquarters. Her executive team had arrived for emergency consultations, her publicist fielding hundreds of media requests, her attorneys preparing statements. The Bennett Financial stock had dropped 5% in pre-market trading before stabilizing as investors processed the news. "Your phone is ringing again," Jane said, passing Aaliyah her personal cell. "That's the 8th call from Rhodes in the last hour." Aaliyah silenced it without looking. "Let him squirm. I have bigger concerns." The elevator chimed, and Aaliyah's heart leapt to her throat as the triplets entered, confusion evident on their faces. She dismissed her team with a look, the room clearing immediately. "Mom, what's going on?" Lucas asked, his blue-gray eyes, Alexander's eyes, filled with concern. "The driver wouldn't tell us anything." Aaliyah gestured for them to sit. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." Before she could continue, Maya held up her tablet. "Is it about this?" The headline glared from the screen, along with a side-by-side comparison photo of Lucas and Alexander that highlighted their unmistakable resemblance. Aaliyah closed her eyes briefly. "Yes, Alexander Rhodes is our father," Maya stated flatly. "Not a sperm donor, not a production choice, the CEO of Rhodes Investments. the man who was at the conference last night." Silence hung heavy in the room as the triplets processed this revelation. Olivia's face remained impassive, fingers tapping a silent melody on her leg, her way of processing emotion. Lucas paced the room, his movements reminiscent of Alexander in a way that now seemed painfully obvious. Maya simply stared at Aaliyah, her analytical mind visibly connecting pieces of a puzzle 15 years in the making. "Why didn't you tell us?" Maya finally asked, her voice tightly controlled. "Because I wanted you to be defined by your own achievements, not by his abandonment," Aaliyah answered, the truth finally spilling out. "And I needed to prove, first to myself, then to the world, that we could build something extraordinary without him." "He threw you out?" Lucas asked incredulously. "When you were pregnant with us?" Aaliyah nodded, the painful memory still sharp despite the years. "He gave me $5,000 and told me never to contact him again. Then he used his influence to have me fired from my job." Olivia, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "And last night when I saw you speaking with him, that was the first time you'd seen him since then?" "Yes." Maya's eyes flashed with a cold anger that reminded Aaliyah of herself. "So he built his life without us, married someone else, had another child, all while you struggled alone?" "I wasn't alone for long," Aaliyah said gently. "I had you three, and eventually, Eleanor, we built our family without him." "Does he want to know us now?" Lucas asked, his pragmatic nature seeking the path forward. "I think he's still processing the revelation," Aaliyah replied carefully. "But whatever he wants doesn't dictate what happens next. You're 15, old enough to decide for yourselves if you want any relationship with him." Throughout the morning, the full impact of the revelation reverberated through financial markets. Rhodes Investments stock plummeted 17% by midday, trading temporarily halted to prevent free fall. The story of Alexander's abandonment resonated particularly poorly considering the corporate family responsibility program he had championed in recent years, positioning himself as an advocate for working parents. By early afternoon, news broke that Alexander's fiancée, he had been engaged again following his divorce 3 years earlier, had canceled their wedding planned for the following month. The public statement cited personal re-evaluation as the reason. Aaliyah's phone continued to vibrate with Alexander's increasingly desperate calls, which she continued to ignore. Her focus remained on her children, who spent the day processing their new reality in characteristic ways. Maya researching Rhodes Investments' financial history, Olivia composing at her piano, Lucas reading everything he could find about Alexander. At 3:15, Caroline's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Bennett, Alexander Rhodes is in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment but insists on seeing you. Security is asking for instructions." Aaliyah exchanged glances with the triplets. "Your call. Do you want to see him?" After a brief conference, they decided to let him wait. "Make him experience a fraction of what you did," Maya said coldly. After an hour in the lobby, Alexander was finally escorted to Aaliyah's office. He entered looking disheveled, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of strain, tie loosened, hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "You've ruined my life," he accused without preamble, his composed facade cracking. 15 years later, you decide to take revenge? Aaliyah regarded him calmly from behind her desk. "If I wanted revenge, Alexander, I would have acquired your company when it began failing in 2018, dismantled it, and sold the parts. Don't confuse truth with revenge. The difference is that the truth was always there, just waiting to be acknowledged." "I have rights," he insisted, pacing the office. "They're my children. I want to know them." "Rights?" Aaliyah laughed without humor. "You abdicated those rights when you handed me $5,000 to disappear. Fortunately, the triplets are 15 and can decide for themselves whether they want to know you." Alexander's gaze darted around the office, taking in the evidence of her success. Awards lining the walls, the view of Manhattan from the top floor of a building bearing her name. "You planned this from the beginning." "No, Alexander. I planned to build a life for myself and my children. The fact that your company is now begging to be acquired by mine is simply—" She paused, letting the moment stretch. "What would you call it? Market synchronicity." Before Alexander could respond, the intercom buzzed. "Ms. Bennett, the Rhodes Investments Board is on line 1. They want to discuss a possible acquisition by Bennett Financial." Alexander paled visibly. "You can't be serious." Aaliyah stood, indicating the meeting was over. "My lawyers will contact you about a possible supervised meeting with the Triplets if they wish it. Until then, I suggest you prepare for your board meeting. It sounds urgent." As Alexander was escorted from her office, Aaliyah moved to the window, watching the construction of the Bennett Tower continue. The empire she had built from nothing now cast its shadow over the man who had once cast her aside. While watching Alexander exit her building, Aaliyah didn't imagine that the following week she would be sitting in her living room watching her 3 children formally confront the man who never wanted to know them, an encounter that would change the destiny of both families forever. The Bennett penthouse glowed with soft morning light as Maya meticulously arranged financial documents on the dining table. Each paper was positioned with mathematical precision: quarterly reports from Rhodes Investments, stock performance charts, and a detailed analysis of the company's impending bankruptcy that she had compiled herself. At 15, Maya's analytical abilities already rivaled those of seasoned financial analysts. "Is this excessive?" Olivia asked, observing her sister's preparations while practicing finger exercises on the edge of the table. "He's already losing everything." "It's not excessive, it's factual," Maya replied, adjusting her glasses. "He should understand exactly what he threw away." Lucas entered with a notebook filled with questions, primarily focused on medical history. "Statistically speaking, knowing our paternal medical background could extend our lifespans by identifying preventable conditions." Aaliyah watched her children prepare for this momentous meeting with a mixture of pride and apprehension. 1 week had passed since the media explosion revealed their connection to Alexander Rhodes. The triplets had processed the revelation in their distinct ways, Maya with cold calculation, Olivia with quiet observation, Lucas with pragmatic acceptance. "You don't have to do this," Aaliyah reminded them, straightening Lucas's tie. "He doesn't define who you are." "We know that, Mom," Lucas replied, his expression serious. "We want to meet him not because we need him, but to understand completely where we came from and how far we've come without him." The security system announced Alexander's arrival downstairs. Maya straightened her blazer, Olivia closed her eyes briefly as if centering herself, and Lucas reviewed his questions one last time. When the elevator doors opened, Alexander Rhodes stepped into the Bennett penthouse, his appearance markedly different from their glimpse of him at the conference. His custom suit hung slightly loose, evidence of recent weight loss, and new lines etched his face. His eyes, the same striking blue-gray as Lucas's, darted nervously around the luxurious space before settling on the 3 teenagers standing beside their mother. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he said, his voice less commanding than the triplets had imagined from news clips. Aaliyah gestured toward the living room. "The children have agreed to 1 hour. I'll be in my office if they need me." "You're not staying?" Alexander asked, a note of panic in his voice. "This is between you and them," Aaliyah replied. "They're perfectly capable of handling this conversation." As Aaliyah retreated to her office, she watched Alexander take a seat across from the triplets, the coffee table between them like a demilitarized zone. The man who had once dismissed her and their unborn children as inconvenient obstacles to his ambition now sat nervously before the extraordinary young people she had raised alone. Alexander cleared his throat, fingers fidgeting with his watch, the same nervous habit Aaliyah remembered from 15 years ago. "I'm not sure where to begin," he admitted. Perhaps with why you abandoned our mother when she told you she was pregnant, Maya suggested, her tone clinically detached despite the emotional weight of her words. Alexander winced. I was young, focused on my career. You were 32, Maya interrupted. Not young. And according to my research, Rhodes Investments was already well established. The timing was complicated, Alexander continued, his rehearsed explanation faltering under Maya's precise assessment. The markets were volatile, and I was in the middle of a critical acquisition. More critical than your own children? Lucas asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Alexander's gaze dropped to his hands. I made a terrible mistake. One I've regretted more than you can imagine. Have you? Olivia spoke for the first time, her musical voice carrying unexpected gravity. Did you regret it when you got engaged 3 months after throwing our mother out? Or when you had your son with your first wife? Or was it only after our mother built a company that's now worth more than yours that you discovered your regret? The question hung in the air, unanswerable in its precision. Alexander attempted to change direction. You three are extraordinary. Maya, I've read about your patents. Olivia, your musical accomplishments are remarkable. And Lucas, your debate championships and linguistic abilities. Our accomplishments aren't your vindication, Maya stated flatly. They happened despite your absence, not because of it. Alexander's expression shifted to something resembling genuine pain. I know, I'm not trying to take credit. I just want you to know that I'm proud of what you've achieved. You don't get to be proud of what you didn't help build, Lucas replied, though his tone remained more measured than his sister's. I do have practical questions, though. Is there any history of heart disease in your family? Cancer? Neurological conditions? Alexander appeared momentarily relieved to address something concrete. He detailed his family's medical history, which Lucas noted meticulously. I'd like to make up for lost time, Alexander ventured when the medical discussion concluded. Perhaps regular dinners, or I could attend your performances, Olivia. And Maya, I'd be interested in discussing your financial models. Your company is on the verge of insolvency, Maya interrupted, sliding a report across the table. Based on current trajectories, Rhodes Investments will require either acquisition or bankruptcy protection within 8 months. Your personal net worth has declined 63% in the past 3 years. Alexander stared at the document, then at Maya. How did you access this information? I analyzed publicly available data and applied predictive modeling, she replied with a small shrug. Your company's worth less than my individual trust fund. The stark assessment left Alexander momentarily speechless. Olivia leaned forward, studying his face with artistic precision. Did you ever wonder about us? Our first steps? First words? Did you ever look at your son and wonder about the 3 children you threw away? I didn't know there were 3 of you, he whispered, anguish finally breaking through his composed facade. I didn't know anything. Your mother disappeared. After you had her escorted from your building and blocked her number, Lucas reminded him. She didn't disappear. You erased her. For the next 20 minutes, Alexander attempted to explain, apologize, and offer promises of future compensation. Each effort was met with the clear-eyed assessment of 3 teenagers who had never needed to construct elaborate justifications for unconscionable actions. When the hour concluded, Aaliyah returned to find Alexander looking defeated, facing 3 young people who remained unmoved by his belated attempts at connection. Time's up, she announced. As the triplets excused themselves, Alexander remained seated, waiting until they had left the room before addressing Aaliyah. They're remarkable, he said quietly. You did an incredible job. Did you expect anything less? She asked. You won, Alexander conceded, his shoulders slumping. You built all of this just to show me what I lost. Aaliyah studied him for a moment, seeing not the powerful man who had once dismissed her, but someone diminished by his own choices. You still don't understand, she said, genuine pity in her voice. "I didn't build anything because of you. I built it despite you. The difference is fundamental." She walked to the door, opening it to indicate his exit. "The real victory isn't having proved you wrong about me, Alexander. It's that, after everything I've built, you've become completely irrelevant to my story." As the elevator doors closed on Alexander Rhodes, returning him to a world crumbling around him, Aaliyah joined her children on the penthouse terrace. Together, they gazed at the empire they had built, a skyline punctuated by buildings where Bennett Financial had transformed the market, where their scholarship programs had educated hundreds of young people, where their microcredit initiatives had rescued families from poverty. "He asked if I built all this to get revenge," Aaliyah mentioned, her arms around her children's shoulders. "What did you tell him?" Olivia asked. "That we built all this because it's what we deserved from the beginning." Aaliyah smiled at her children, her true legacy. "Some call it revenge. I call it poetic justice." The setting sun bathed Manhattan in golden light, illuminating the empire that had risen from the ashes of abandonment, not as a monument to vengeance, but as testament to the unshakable power of a woman who refused to be defined by what she had lost, and instead redefined the meaning of everything she had gained. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.